Rural Heritage on RFD TV is brought to you by Rural Heritage Magazine, a bi-monthly magazine featuring articles about farming and logging with draft animal power, small-scale diversified family farming and homesteading, and other aspects of our rich rural heritage. Rural Heritage Magazine, borrowing from yesterday to do the work of today. For subscription information, please call 319-362-3027 or order online at www.ruralheritage.com. Hi, I'm Joe Mishka. Welcome to another episode of Rural Heritage TV. A couple weeks ago, we showed you some of the wagons restored by Mike Vogel in his Southern Ohio shop. Mike is able to salvage and use a lot of the original iron from the wagons he restores. But sometimes he needs pieces made. He prefers them to be made in the manner of the period the wagon originally came from. Unfortunately, not a lot of iron workers, or even blacksmiths, know or practice some of the techniques used back in the day. Thankfully, Mike found Jack Miller in a town nearby. About 20 or so years ago, Jack retired from his job where he helped build tall buildings, hanging iron as it's called. Today he spends a lot of his time making things using the tools and techniques from hundreds of years ago. Here's the first episode from our visit with Jack. We'll have more in future shows. On the day of our visit, it was too cold to go out in the shop, but Jack showed us some of his creations. We look forward to going back when the weather is better so we can show you Jack in action. Have you been doing this all your life? Blacksmithing?
No, I was a structural steel erector for 31
Oh,
years.
that's right. You were telling me that.
And I retired, and that's been, I guess this fall, it'll be 25 years.
Okay.
And I decided, well, when I was a young man, when I was 10 years old, we'd go to my grandparents' farm in Delaware, Ohio. I was raised in Michigan. And they still had an anvil and an old granary. And, well, it was like going back in time because my grandparents, that was in 1960, I was 10. They still had a wood cook stove and an outhouse. And it was like going back in time. And I tell people, they say, how did you learn this? I said, well, I went back in time and I never recovered from it.
Did you have a mentor that taught you, or a couple of them?
No,
You self-taught.
right.
Books?
Books, yeah, books. I've watched a couple videos and I watched a couple people demonstrate because I've been to a club,
Sure.
I used to belong to a club up north.
Sure.
But,
And then you guys would have gatherings where you'd all work at
Right,
somebody's
yeah.
place and you'd take turns.
and I'm just one of them guys that I can watch somebody do something and I can probably do it, When I set up and demonstrate, I'll have this sitting there and people will come along and say, oh, I know what that is. A boot scraper. And I say to them, well, you could use it for that, but you'd have to wash it up real good on pizza movie night because it's a pizza cutter. And they laugh, like I'm kidding.
Right.
Like it's really a boot scraper.
No, I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought it was some kind of a kindling
Yeah,
splitter
some
or
people
something.
think it's a drawing knife. They
Yeah,
say, oh, I know what
yeah,
this
yeah.
is, and I tell them no.
Wow.
But it works great. I chop vegetables,
Huh. Is that antique?
No, I made this.
Okay, you
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah,
Wow.
I made everything here.
Oh, that is nice.
And
Huh.
this is gas pipe. I got a device out there that's like a guillotine. You hammer on it and you neck those down. So I made 4 of those, and then I put them on there and put a rivet all the way through and riveted it.
This is a lot nicer than it needs to be.
Well,
It is. Don't you think?
yeah. In fact, I've considered trying to make them out of one piece where this comes up and just you bend it into a handle. So there'd be a handle over here and a handle there. So it'd be all one piece, and then
Yeah.
it would be faster to make, easier to make. And this is an exercise in forge welding. I take a piece of 5/8 or 3/4 and bring it around like a donut and forge weld that together at that junction.
And then you rework it after that to make it perfectly round.
Right, yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's not perfect, but it's getting there. It's close. But people say, "What's the purpose?" Well, you learn how to forge weld.
Really well. Yeah.
And I make fireplace cranes, and I discovered from cooking in my own fireplace that if you put a turkey in a Dutch oven and put it on the crane, you'll burn one side of it unless you turn it 180 degrees. Well,
There
I
you don't
made-
have to take it off and flip it around and
Right.
put it back on again. You
yeah,
just turn
now
it.
I just turn it with a poker.
Yeah. Are you working mostly from steel you buy from a steel supplier, or are you repurposing steel that you find, or both?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to find wrought iron. Quite often I've been to junkyards where people just scrap it. They don't know what it is. And the only place I know that makes it is made in England, and it's real expensive. So I try to snatch all I see, bring it home.
So people throw around words all the time about describing steel. There's cast iron, wrought iron, mild steel.
Tool steel.
Yeah. Are those all just carbon content differences?
Right, right.
Including cast iron?
Cast iron actually has a real high content, I guess. But you can't forge it. It just crumbles if you try to do that. But wrought iron virtually has zero carbon. I can show you when we go back outside. You put it on a grinder, and there's just some red sparks coming off that,
They burn up.
yeah, well, they don't burn up. But you put tool steel on there, and the sparks burst in
Okay.
midair. And they'll, real good, real high carbon, it'll burst, and those will burst.
Okay. Like
So-
fireworks.
Yes, that's the carbon burning up.
Okay.
You've probably seen wing nuts. Well, this was an original style wing nuts. You see them on,
threaded?
yeah, you see them on wagons and
Yeah,
things. you
yeah,
know.
yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, mild steel. Yeah, I made these from a picture in a book. These are for trimming your candle wicks.
Oh, nice. Huh. This is just a lot of neat stuff. This is gorgeous.
Yeah, thanks. People say, how do you get that color on those? Well, when you're tempering a piece, you heat it up, and it'll turn a straw yellow, and then it'll turn brown, and then kind of I guess, red, and then this purple, and then it'll turn blue. And if it's tool steel, you're trying to take some of the hardness out.
Okay.
So you're not annealing it, but you are tempering it, it's called. And so by warming it up to 580 degrees, that acquires that blue color. You don't want to go past that. If you make it silver blue, you just softened it too much and it won't hold an edge. So I quenched this at probably closer to 500. But people say to me, how do you get that color on there? I tell them, I do that on the wife's electric range, but don't tell her. See, the original tool steel was water quench. It's called W1. But all spring steel today, torsion bars, leaf springs, coil springs, that's called 5160. And that designates it a tool steel, but it's got more than just carbon in it. It's got other things like. So what happens is you can't quench that in water. If you do, it'll crack. So it shrinks. The jacket shrinks so fast, so much faster than the interior, that it'll split it.
Okay.
It can't take it.
Uh-huh.
And so you have to quench that in oil, and it quenches, it cools it so much slower, but it's still even, and that's what makes it hard.
What is that?
These are, I copied out of a book. I'll get the book out and have to show you. Sam Streeter's, I believe is his name. He's on the East Coast. These are English colonial pipe tongs, and they're hammered out of 2 pieces of 1/2 inch square. And this, I made the spring out of some spring steel. And I didn't want that spring to do this,
Right.
so I put a square hole and a square rivet in it.
That's terrific.
Yeah. And everything has a purpose. This is for packing the bowl, your pipe. And this is for scraping the bowl. So, yeah, they came out all right.
It's gorgeous. Yeah, it's terrific. I was thinking it was some kind of a surgical device.
Yeah. And then somebody invented matches, and this guy went to the unemployment line.
Oh, so this is to hold a coal, or what is this
Yeah,
to
yeah.
hold then?
Yeah, you reach in the fire,
Okay.
and you grab a hot coal and light your pipe.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
I forgot to say that.
Wow. So making blades is all the rage now on TV. Whenever I talk to anybody about blacksmithing that watches TV, they always talk about that.
Yeah. Well,
That's-
I can't tell you how many women at a show will come up to me and say, my son's kind of shy over there, but he wants to know if you'll teach him to make swords. And here's this 13-year-old standing there. Well, tell him to go to England for about 5 years as an apprentice, and maybe he can learn something, you know. They don't want to make this first. They
Right.
want to make this.
Exactly.
And they don't have a clue,
Right.
you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here's a bell I made.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, it's louder than you would imagine.
Yes, it is.
And I showed my wife, and she said, what's that for? And I said, well, it's for room service. And she said, well, I can't hear that.
This is wood you carved?
Yeah, yeah, I whittled this. This is a letter opener. I whittled out a black walnut.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, there's the pulpwood part of the tree, and there's the heartwood.
That is really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I did that with a pocket knife.
Seriously.
Yeah, the eyeballs were kind of tough. And there's no sanding on this. This was all done with just a blade edge, you know.
Wow. What
Yeah.
kind of wood is that?
Black walnut. And then I made this for my wife.
That is so sweet.
Yeah, this is bird's eye maple. In fact, it's the smallest little bird's eyes I've ever seen in maple.
That is sweet.
I found a piece of flooring one day, and I thought, I know what I'm going to do with that. So I took it to work, and at coffee break and lunchtime, I made this. Was sitting at the table while guys were sitting over here playing cards, yelling at each other, you know. But these aren't glued in. I made them the right length where I snapped them in.
Wow.
And it's not too hard to make one of these, but to make one
Match.
a left and a right to match, it's
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrific.
feel the seat.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
Yep, yep. They don't make them like that anymore. They're big ones.
no, they don't. I guess. Yeah, here's
Yep, that's
a
beautiful.
basket handle.
Yep.
This is all forged welded together. And I've always been interested in. Yeah, that's a recipe holder.
Yeah, that's nice. That is really nice. And that's smart too. That is sweet.
Yeah, spring loaded.
I love that.
Thanks. It doesn't make my wife bake anymore, though.
You carved out these spoons?
Yeah, I just did this one last week when it was cold. I couldn't get out to the barn. I had to do something. I was going crazy.
With hand tools?
Yeah, everything here is done by, I mean, I might use a grinder on something now and then, but
Yeah.
yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
that
a
was
couch?
that's what I made that with. Yeah.
Okay.
And this was a piece of a coil spring.
Okay. So you hammered out this end out of the coil spring, or that's forge welded on? This is
No,
two
that's
pieces?
all one piece. Yeah.
Is it? Wow.
Yeah. And here's a little bathtub I hammered out of a flat sheet.
Good Lord. And then you soldered the legs on.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I made a little die and a punch, and I put a piece of brass on there, wham, and it would, in one hit, it would make that. I'd have to trim it, but they all came out looking the same. Yeah,
Well, there's no way you had time to make all this stuff. There's no way. And I mean,
But I don't work, so
right.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
yeah. And this was a flat sheet when I started, and I learned that out of a book, and that's called raising a vessel. So when you're raising it, this is the raising part of the hammer,
Okay.
and this is the finishing, planishing, to smooth it out.
And you made that hammer.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you don't have the tool, you stop and make it. You know, that's the fun part about being a blacksmith.
Uh-huh.
Here's a kind of a Viking style.
X, yeah.
Yeah. And this was slit open, and you put a piece of tool steel in and forge weld it in, you can see.
Wow. Yeah,
When you temper it, it turns a different color.
sure.
Yeah, you can see better. This one, you can
Yep,
see
you
the
can
tool
see it.
steel
Yeah,
down in there.
Right.
And this one's a little different because I pierced that eye. But this is a folded axe where you take a bar and you put two heavy dents in it, and in between you cut it almost through and you fold it. There's your two dents.
Oh my goodness.
So then you forge weld it back together, and before you close it up, you put a piece of tool steel in and forge weld it in.
Wow.
And that's how they did axes. When they say a folded axe,
That's what they mean.
it's a folded axe.
Because they didn't want to punch it through. Because they
Right.
didn't.
Well, the main reason is when you try to slit wrought iron, it wants to come apart where it was put together.
Okay.
Because wrought iron, it comes in a bloom when they bring it out of the furnace. It looks like a sea urchin or something. Looks like coral.
Okay.
It's all porous, and they'll knock pieces off, and then they'll forge weld it.
Into a shape.
Yeah, and so they're trying to get all the slag out of it.
Gotcha.
And
But there are folds in it then when they do that. That's what you're saying. When the pieces want to come apart, it's forging in on itself.
Right.
It's welding in on itself.
so it's almost like taking cottage cheese and all them little balls, you're sticking them together and forging it. And the substance between them is slag, which is molten, who knows, limestone or something
Sure.
coming out of it.
Right. Impurities.
Yeah, and that will come back apart if you try to slit it, unless you really refine it and just keep folding it and welding it. That's why wagon wheel tires will have splits in them.
Okay.
So when you can draw it out, and you'll see the lines in it. You even see it. Some wrought iron looks like it has a wood grain to it,
Okay.
and that's because of that.
I see.
The slag striations in it, I
Huh.
guess is what they are. So when you try to slit that, I've done that, and it'll just,
Come apart.
yeah, it'll come apart in places,
So when I see somebody punching a hole in a hammerhead, they're using a different quality steel than when they're doing that. It's not raw
Yeah,
iron.
right.
It's steel they got from a supplier that.
Yeah, this
They can punch
this
through.
this is 4140. It's harder.
Okay.
It's not as hard as 5160 spring steel, but it's a hammer steel. Here's a miniature, like a coach builder's axe, German coach builder's axe type of axe. Has a long beard and ears.
This is a cookie cutter.
Yeah, that's called I copied that out of Streeter's book. That's called a colonial biscuit cutter. Of course, they call cookies biscuits.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I made that for the wife.
And this is for.
That's the bowl ads I made the bowl with. And then, yeah, This is probably the first chisel I made, and this is for doing the outside of that bowl. I've got a big wooden hammer. So this is wrought iron. You can see how ugly it is, but it worked out
How far
well.
up does that wood go?
Probably to here.
Yeah, that is terrific.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a piece of a torsion bar from a 3/4 ton truck. So why go buy tool steel for $20 a pound or whatever, some crazy amount of money? Then you can just go to the junkyard and get it, and there's nothing wrong with it. This is one of those tools that you wake up at 2 in the morning and think that you were just run over, your shoulder was just run over by a bulldozer or something. Here's a candle holder. This is my design. These are called fishtail scrolls.
Sure.
Yeah, and people always have to ask me. I'll be set up demonstrating, and I'll have about 10 axes stuck on the top of a stump. People come along. First thing they gotta ask me is, "Hey, mister, can you throw them axes?" Well, that did in ancient times. People threw axes now and then, but why would you throw away your weapon?
Right.
If you missed, you got problems.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So they'll say, "Yeah, mister, can you throw them axes?" I tell them, I say, "Well, yeah, this one right here. When it was half done, I threw it all the way across the shop."
There's too much here to look at.
Yeah, that piece, I decided I got a book for Christmas. Santa Claus brought me a book on how to make barrels. That's for scraping the inside of this.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and what you do is you light a fire in there before you put the bottom in. And I don't know if you're familiar with steaming wood,
Sure.
but it has the same effect. It warms this up,
Okay.
and it conforms, it closes all the, if you've got some
So is that
gaps.
coopering?
Yes. And these aren't all permanent. So this is
Sure.
just still an experiment. But you can see I made the bottom for it. But you start a fire in there, so then it's all kind of black, and that's touch and go. You just put all this time in something and you're going to burn it up,
Right. Right.
So then you shave all the black out with this. And you're familiar with a tire iron.
Sure.
That's what this was.
Wow.
So yeah, so you upset the end and you fatten it up a little bit, and then you slit it, and then you open that up and just form it the way you want, and
Good Lord.
it's pretty sharp. And the reason it's bent is if you've ever done any wood carving, if you try to carve like that, there's a lot of resistance, but if you carve like
Sure.
that, you get more work done.
Right, right, right.
And
Yeah, you figured
so,
that out pretty quick.
yeah, so it was chattering, and I thought, I'll bet as soon as I moved that over, it's cutting through on an angle, and
Yeah.
it doesn't chatter as much. So you learn so much just by doing.
We'll be back with Jack Miller to see more of his creations in an upcoming episode this summer.
This program is available for purchase. To order your copy, please call 319-362-3027 or visit www.ruralheritage.com. Rural Heritage is a bi-monthly magazine dedicated to draft animal farming and logging, as well as other aspects of our rich rural heritage. It is published by Mishka Press, which also offers a complete line of Back to the Land books, DVDs, and calendars. Call or write for a catalog or subscription information, or visit our website at www.ruralheritage.com.